What I thought I'd do is I'll keep it reasonably tight because it's obviously coming up to the close of play, but I thought I'd talk you through my career so far and how I've ended up covering what I think is the most important story in the UK at the moment, which is Scottish independence. I was hoping to show you some front pages, but I can't get the technology to work, so just bear with me. I started off reading law at Edinburgh University. I'd always wanted to be a journalist, and I thought law would be sort of an interesting way into it. As it transpires, a lot of what I've learned I'm using on a day-to-day basis now. Constitutional law, which at university seemed to me a very dry subject, is actually happening in action at the moment as we watch whether or not the UK breaks up. Throughout my degree at Edinburgh, I did work experience, which, as Andrew mentioned, I think is the most important thing that you can do. And in my case, it directly led me to getting my first job. So every summer, every Easter, I would spend a couple of weeks at the Aberdeen Press and Journal, doing pretty much anything and everything. I'd go out and I'd cover Brownie's car washing, or I'd tag along to the court. I'd do pretty much anything. So when I graduated from Edinburgh, I intended to go and do a postgrad in London, City University. Turned out that I got a place and I couldn't afford to go, so I was stuck with no clue what I was going to do next, and still doing work experience. And it so happened that the woman who organised my work experience said, "We've got a place at Trinity Mirror training scheme, you can do that if you want, and if you're any good, we'll give you a job afterwards," which they did. So if I hadn't gone and done work experience in those holidays, they said I wouldn't have a job now. So that's pretty much the main piece of advice that I would take away from this. Just seize every opportunity that you can, and you never know what's going to come out of it. You know, whether it's small ones, big ones, just anything anybody offers you in this career, take it. When I started off at the P&J, I was doing pretty much what I was doing on work experience, volunteering for everything, working as many hours as I could, pestering the senior reporters, asking, you know, if I could go in my holidays and go and work at the Parliament for them and things like that. And then if you do that for long enough, basically people are going to come up to you and start offering you opportunities. So a few years into my career, I got to go to Afghanistan, which was incredible. Myself and a photographer out there for a week in Helmand Province, staying at Camp Bastion. At one point we got shelled, attacked by the Taliban basically, and ended up having to hide in a shelter. And that's another thing, this job, no matter what anybody says to you about, you know, the fact that the opportunities are declining, that there are cuts and so on, it's still the best job in the world. And if you can get a foot in the door anywhere, just grab it. 2 years into my career at the Press and Journal, they advertised for an assistant news editor. I just finished my traineeship, and it was probably above and beyond what I should have been aiming for at the time, but again, just the opportunity comes up, grab it. I became chief reporter there and worked on the news desk, which is just another way to sort of expand your skills. And it gave me the chance to go and work at the Scotsman. As Andrew mentioned, Scotland's got this sort of intermediate layer, I guess, between regionals and national newspapers. Scotsman, the Herald, it's a real chance to kind of work your way up towards the nationals that you don't necessarily get elsewhere. When I moved to the Scotsman, it was 2007, and the banking crash was just about to happen. I happened to be there when HBOS collapsed, and I was a senior reporter. And I knew nothing about business journalism at the time, and I had to very quickly learn on the job. And I covered the collapse of HBOS, the collapse of RBS, and the sort of all the ramifications from that, just by, again, being in the right place at the right time, just sticking your hand up and saying, look, you know, I can do this, just give me a chance. I worked with some great business journalists there, and if you ask people questions, they're going to help you out. They want to talk about what they know. And because when I was there, I was getting my name on the front page all the time through this story. A job came up at the Times in Scotland, and I was in a position where I could take that. I joined the Times 4 years ago, and the first 3 years was all general news. So I covered things like the Royal Moat shooting that Andrew mentioned, north of England. Again, it wasn't my patch, but I happened to be down in Northumberland the weekend it happened. I heard about it in the radio news, phoned up the London news desk and said, look, if I go and try and find, I don't know if you remember the girlfriend who was shot, her sister. I just went and tracked her down, got an interview with her, ends up in the paper, and they let me stay in the story for a week, which was fantastic. In the March of last year, things changed around in Scotland. My editor left, the political editor moved up to take on that role, and his job was open. I hadn't really covered any politics up at the time, but you know, the story was, as I say, the biggest story in the UK was breaking at the time. So I managed to wheedle my way into Holyrood, and I have been covering Scottish politics since then. I think it is the story which exemplifies how important journalism is at the moment. I think if you have got, I don't know how much you guys have been following this story, but you're in a position where you've got the yes campaign, you've got the no campaign, and they're fighting a very, very bitter battle to save the Union or to have Scottish independence. And you need somebody in the middle, an independent free press, to look at the claims from both sides and say, you know, what are these people actually telling us? Is this true? What are these figures they're presenting us with? What's happening beneath this spin? And you know, really share it with the readers. Everyone in Scotland is going to have a vote in 2014 if they're on the electoral roll, and it's going to be the most important decision, like constitutionally, that they're ever going to take. And it's so important that, as the media, we can provide them with the facts that they need to make the decision. When I started covering politics for the Times, as I say, it was in the March. It was literally 3 months, I think, after David Cameron had said to Alex Salmond, you know, you want to have this referendum, I'll facilitate that happening. So in the year that I've been in Holyrood, I've been writing about this pretty much every day, and it's been absolutely fascinating. As I say, I didn't know that much about politics when I started. I hadn't studied politics at university. I was a general news reporter, but it's been an incredible learning curve, and it's just such an exciting thing to be involved in at the moment. And I think it really shows that, you know, when I started off, I thought, I want to write. I don't exactly know what I want to do, and I wouldn't have envisaged myself doing this, but the opportunities come up as you go along. If you take them, you can find yourself at the centre of the story. There's a huge amount of responsibility associated with it. You know, as I say, we're providing the facts, but you have to be objective. I would like to think that I am. I think that there is a lot of potential for you to write something which will be picked up upon by either side of the debate, and used as sort of proof that you lean towards one or the other side. I think it's very important to ensure that you can walk the most central line that you can. Just to give you some examples of where the media is vital here. The Scottish nationalists are obviously setting out their vision for an independent Scotland, saying things like, this is the currency that we will use, this is the position that we will have in the EU, this is the regulator that we will have for our banks. And what it's very important as a journalist to do is to say, okay, you say that we're going to share sterling. Is that actually going to happen? So you put in a call to the other side and you say, well, have you had these conversations? And you know, sometimes perhaps they haven't. We also have access to academics that the voters perhaps don't. So where you have the nationalists laying out what they think will happen, or indeed you have the unionists laying out what they think will happen, you can get in touch with an academic, for example, at a law school, and say, look, can you just read through this document for me and tell me, is this bona fide? And they'll say yes, they'll say no, you can write a story from that. Aside from what's happening in Holyrood with independence, obviously the governing of Scotland is going alongside that. So in Scotland we've got responsibility for education, health, pretty much everything apart from welfare, income tax, defence and foreign affairs. So we're still reporting on education, on health. You all right?
Yeah.
And one journalist said to me that the reason the politics is so important, the reason this job is so important, is that anything of any importance in Scotland ends up here, and it's absolutely true. If you look at health, stories that we've had recently have included funding for a cancer drugs, whether or not we should have a cancer drugs fund. So you have people, sufferers coming to Holyrood to give evidence on that. Tuition fees, obviously massively important to you guys. Education is free in Scotland at the moment, and there's a big debate about whether or not it can be kept free, and I've been reporting quite heavily on that. An example today would be, you'll have seen the Keith O'Brien allegations, and the fact that Cardinal Keith O'Brien has, as I understand it, tendered his resignation. Stories like that have political import as well. If checking through my emails today, we've had statements from the First Minister on it. The horsemeat scandal of last week, political implications from the Environment Secretary in Scotland faced quite a hard time over his handling of that. I think you can tell basically from the way I've kind of gone through my career and the opportunities that I've taken, exactly how that's sort of brought me to where I am. Particularly going back to the work experience, going back to the shorthand, going back to covering the news stories that I've covered. Every single one of those, basically, I use in my job today. If you can door knock, for example, the victim of a crime, you can ask a question to a politician. You're not intimidated by that. Basically, I think it probably just makes sense to open up to questions. And if you guys would like to ask me anything about what I've been doing and how that could help you, go for it. Hi.
If you were given the opportunity to cover British politics, like around London, would you be up for that?
I would at some point, yeah. I think, as I said at the beginning, this is such an important story, so I certainly want to cover this to the referendum. I want to see how it pans out. And although, I say that I cover Scottish politics, it's a British story. We've had all the big figures in the cabinet who have come up here, come up to Scotland and will continue to do so. So it really is covering British politics, but from a Scottish location. And yeah, if the job came up, I would certainly consider it. Yeah.
It sounds like you sort of made something of a career from the devolution referendum, and I take a sort of novice interest in it because I find it all very fascinating.
Yeah.
But what more is to it apart from principle, in as brief a terms as possible?
As in the principle of independence for independence' sake. I think the debate comes very much down to practical arguments, really. If you look at the polling at the moment, Polls tend to put it about, well, our last poll put support for independence at about 35% and against at 65%. But that's among those who are certain to vote. A large population, and a large part of the population is undecided at the moment. So I think that part of the population will decide very much on whether or not they're going to be better off as a result of independence or as a result of staying in the Union. And that's very much how both sides are making the argument at the moment, which again is why journalism is so important, because you'll see claims from one side that you'll be £500 better off a year as a result of independence. You see claims from the other side that it'll cost you £1 for independence. So it's really looking at those figures and thinking, well, who's telling me the truth here? Yeah, I'd say that's pretty much what it comes into. Hi.
Sorry, I was living in Scotland for the last 6 years.
Right.
And the argument that I got sick of hearing from people that want independence is, we'll keep all the oil and we'll take none of the debt.
Right.
What's the truth?
That is the $1 million question. I can't tell you factually what the answer is. I could tell you what both sides say about it. With the actually, I say I could tell you what both sides say, but it varies. To be honest, it's too difficult to say. Really, sorry. What about yourself?
When it comes to interviewing politicians, especially massive figureheads, you know, like the British cabinet or anything else,
Yeah.
the Scottish cabinet, the Scottish Parliament. Scottish Parliament. How do you actually go about interviewing someone who's been trained to not say anything to the media?
Perseverance, I would say. I think that you have to find ways of phrasing the question perhaps in a way that they hadn't thought about it before. You press the point, you ask it in as many different ways as you possibly can to try and elicit the answer. I mean, a lot of times you won't penetrate what they're what they want to say, but and often just the left field question, the slightly odd question that perhaps they hadn't thought of will elicit an answer. And politicians, they want to get their message out there, and they do. Most politicians, I would say, are genuine, want to help their constituents, want to help the voters. So it's in their interest really to be as helpful as they can. It's not all, you know, nasty party political machinations.
Hi, question from Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
You don't appear to use Twitter a lot. Is there any reason for that?
I should use it more, to be honest. I think that this is a very unpopular opinion, but I think it can inhibit your day-to-day working if you use it too much. And particularly as a general news reporter, if you are covering court, for example, if you need to sit there and take 110 words per minute shorthand, even if there is permission to tweet from court, I don't understand how you can do that and cover the court case properly. But mainly it's just my inability to keep up with modern technology, and I will make an effort to use it more. Go on.
Is it sort of quite difficult when you're working on something like Scottish independence? Is it sort of quite hard to cut through a lot of the propaganda and the sort of slagging each other off and getting through to the sort of the detail?
I think that always has to be your aim. So every bit of information that's presented to you, every single press release, you have to look at this and say, well, what are they actually telling me here? Why are they telling me it? What are they telling me it? And how can I cut through that? And that's where the external experts come in, really. If you can phone somebody up and say, you know, is this claim about European law accurate? Fine, try and go to a third source. That's what makes it so interesting at the moment. You know, there is so much claim and counterclaim, and to try and cut through that just is great.
Once the vote comes in, then what are you going to do for a job?
It depends which way the vote goes. If the vote goes pro-independence, I'm hopefully going to stay and cover the creation of a new state.
I don't mean that to be too sobering.
And if it goes against, I'll stay and cover how Scottish politics redefines itself after that. And hopefully, hopefully I'll still be in a job up to that point at least.
I was going to ask you talked about walking the line, sort of when you're informing, your role of informing the populace so they could decide. But what when your paper suddenly says to you, right, we're taking the view that independents, they should vote no, or they should vote yes. Do you think that's going to happen? And do you think that would be difficult?
I don't know what will happen. To date, the Times hasn't taken an official position on it, and no paper in Scotland has. We're.
Not the Times necessarily, but
why has no paper done it?
Yeah.
I mean, we're almost 2 years before the vote. It's very early to take a position. I mean, if you look at when newspapers tend to take positions before general elections or before Scottish elections, it tends to be very close up to the time of the day. I mean, the Scottish Parliament elections, the Scotsman, I think, announced on the day or the day before that they were going to back the SNP in a very sort of hesitant editorial, I would say. The Sun also backed Alex Salmond, although they didn't back independence. It'll be really interesting actually to see in Scotland which papers come out and declare either way. But I think we're probably some time before doing that. Any other questions? Oh yeah.
Hi. Would you say there's some advantages to being based in Scotland in that, you're a big fish in a slightly smaller, I'm not saying it's a small pond, but it's a slightly smaller pond.
Yeah, of course it is.
And therefore you can, be involved in so many different things when you come.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Scotland's actually a really good place to work, whether in politics or in general news. It's not necessarily thriving as an industry, but there are a lot of titles there for the size of the population. There's a lot of news in Scotland to cover.
And don't they have quite a high newspaper readership?
They've got they do have a high readership, and when Andrew talks about the Press and Journal, the Courier, papers like that, I mean they're performing very, very well. And you also have the advantage of having national newspapers that have Scottish editions, which is what I work for. So the way that the Times works, we've got a number of sort of regional editions, including the Scottish edition. So I get quite a lot of stories in every day into the Scottish edition, and then I'll get a big story into the London edition. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunity to get published.
Well, this is a question for both of you, a follow-up question really, because you were based in Scotland too. Do you think there's any prejudice against being English and working in Scotland, or Irish for that matter, or anything? Or do you think it's easy if you've got a Scottish background?
I can only answer this from a Scottish point of view. It probably helps if Andrew's probably got more of an insight into it. But I mean, certainly from the Holyrood corridor, from the guys who work in there, it's probably 50-50 English-Scottish, and I don't think they're treated any differently. But Andrew's probably got a better perspective on it than I do.
No, even in Aberdeen, and Aberdeen's a strange place.
Yeah, my friend worked on the Press and Journal,
Okay.
and he, in everyday life, not so much there, he did say he experienced a little bit of prejudice in English.
Yeah, it's got a bit of a reputation for that, but it's actually a really diverse place in that there's a lot of international people there because of the oil industry, so it's quite interesting. I never felt it was particularly an issue, and certainly actually a former colleague of ours at the Telegraph and Argus is now editor of the Press and Journal. He's certainly English. He's very English. And his predecessor, who I worked with when I was there, was from Wolverhampton, from Express and Star. So actually, the people in the top jobs are a mixture, aren't they?
Yeah.
So I don't think it's a bad. I think sometimes some of the older school people might.
Hi.
You referred to the guys in the press corridor.
I thought you might pick up on that, or I thought somebody might.
I wondered what the proportion of sort of female sort of job that you're doing is?
I'm the only one.
Really? Wow.
I'm the only female in the press lobby at the moment, and I would say there's probably about 15 guys and me. There's a few women that work in broadcasting, but it tends to be, there's only, as I say, I've been doing this since March and I've been the only girl. Prior to that, there's normally been one woman for different titles that has worked. As to why, which I presume is your next question. I think that in journalism, generally there tend to be fewer women as you move sort of either up the ranks or the older you get. I think a lot of women tend to leave for reasons that women leave any job, when they start a family perhaps. And they perhaps don't come back because of the hours. The hours aren't great at all. I think a number of women go into PR, and that's a popular option. And as to how we keep women in it, I don't know. I think I would certainly recommend it to any woman or any man. It's a great job to do, and there is certainly no bias against women in the corridor that I work in. I'm just treated exactly the same as any of the rest of them, both by MSPs and by other journalists.
Just one more follow-on from that.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever felt, and I don't mean this question to sound sexist, having been a deputy editor,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's good to be unexpected, i.e. people expect men in certain jobs. Have you ever felt it to your advantage that you've been the only female there in the lobby, or that you approach your job in a different kind of way to the other bit of the pack?
I think on a very basic level, you're instantly more recognisable. If you're the only woman in a sea of suits, you are going to be recognised as, that's the only woman that's working there. So people know who you are. Beyond that, I would like to think there wasn't a disadvantage or an advantage. In terms of how I approach my job, there's one notable story, I would say. There was a welfare commission set up in Scotland by the Deputy First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, and it was reported in a Sunday newspaper, and it was a panel of, about five people on this panel set up to look at welfare, reported very straight by this Sunday newspaper. I was following up for the Monday and looked at the names and thought, there's not a woman on that list. And you're looking at welfare and benefits, a lot of which is important to women for, tax credits and so on. And the story that I wrote for the next day was about how this panel had been set up, only one woman on it. And the story I got to write for the day after was about how they backtracked and put a woman on the panel, which was quite nice in that it was something that I believed in and it made a difference. And I'm not sure none of the guys who covered that story picked up on that line. So perhaps that was coming at it from that point of view. Hey.
I would suggest that Scotland, in comparison to England, has fewer sort of power centres, namely Glasgow and Edinburgh, correct me if I'm wrong, but as the Vice of Scotland, how does the Scottish press cope with the less densely populated areas of the Highlands? I love the Highlands, love Skye, love all of Scotland, and in Applecross where I noticed,
that's beautiful.
There was a locally written, obviously nobody with a qualification, but I guess the question is, what is the impact of locally written small-scale newspapers or newspapers for smaller areas on the overall picture in Scotland?
I think first of all you're slightly wrong about power centres. I would definitely include Aberdeen in there because of the industry that it has. I think that the Press and Journal, and not to keep coming back to it, but Press and Journal and the Courier are very good at having local editions. So the P&J has got, I think it's got about 8 now. So that'll cover, there's one for the Highlands and Islands, there's one for Inverness, there's one for the south, which, well, there used to be one for the south, which taking place like Forfar, and they've all got local reporters in situ doing things like covering the local council, covering the courts, and they would have something like 4 or 5 pages of very, very local news every day. So it's actually pretty well covered. And then when they break a big story, that'll then get picked up by the Scottish Nationals and by the Nationals.
Is a Highlands issue not a bit catch-all though? 'Cause it's a very big area.
It is, yeah. They've got an Inverness City one. They've got, sorry?
Especially with the islands as well.
Yeah, it is. But then again, they've also got stringers in Orkney, Shetland, and Western Isles. There are a lot of good freelancers working from out of there, and actually they're very fertile places for stories. And I think there's quite a lot of interest in stories from those kind of areas because they are, so different, and they've got such different sort of makeup, both in terms of population and industry and so on. I like that I'm the voice of Scotland, by the way. Anybody else?
Question out today. Right, so